HSM, how you doing tonight? As always, super stoked to be with you. But before we even get started, I need to be honest with you. I am not a Christmas Grinch by any sense of the word, but up until this point, on the jolliness meter, I've been like a 2. And I was on a run this morning, and as I'm running, there's like the most picturesque snowfall that just like engulfed me, and the jolliness meter went from like 2 to 8. So I'm just like brimming over now. I hope that you're there as well. But y'all know why we're here. We are week 2 of a series that we are calling Better Together. And really what we're trying to accomplish here, what we're driving towards, what our mission is with this series is very simply this. We want to both see and be a more faithful iteration of the church. We want to see God's vision of the church, and we want to challenge each other to be what God is calling us to as his church. So a lot of different things that we'll be talking about throughout this series, but for those of you that were here last week, you know that this is going to look a little bit different than what we would typically do. Typically it'll be just one of us here talking at you, but now we're doing a little bit more conversationally, and I'll be introducing our guest for today shortly. But before we get there, what I want to do is kind of set up the tension of what we'll be talking about today. And one of the best ways to do that is by actually pointing you to this jar of water. Okay, so really simply, here's kind of how I would start you off. I would say that our healthy communities, our healthy life groups, our healthy small groups carry a lot of the same characteristics that this jar of water does. For example, you look at this and it's transparent. You can see right through it. And I would argue that our Christian communities, our small groups should be transparent as too. You should be able to see right through me. I should be able to see right through you. And just knowing each other's intentions, we should be able to be honest and authentic with each other. You're going to notice that this has clarity. It is completely clear. There's nothing weird about it or anything like that. And our groups should be the exact same way. We should have focused groups that know exactly where they're going and exactly how they're getting there, and that place that we're going should be to continually be fully devoted followers of Christ. And just like this jar of water has purity, again, you're not going to see any like gunky gunk in it or anything like that. It's just good water. Our group should be pure too. Our motive should be pure. When you go into your small group, you should be able to be there knowing that the people that are in your circle are for you and you are for them. There's no hidden agendas. There's nothing going on behind the scenes. When you're together, it's full of transparency and clarity and purity. But here's the thing. So many of our groups have a tendency to start off that way and just very gradually drift to a very different place. For example, it takes just one moment, just one time for someone to come in and just let one word slip, one little word that offends someone, and it gets kind of awkward in the group and there's tension and no one really wants to deal with it or call it out or anything like that. So it just kind of gets swept under the rug, and then that moment, that word starts to become slowly a part of the culture of the group, and you say, hey, like, it's just one thing, and we have so much trust that we've already built up. It's not a big deal, and it's just one little thing, and it corrupts it. And then another thing happens, and someone comes in and they do an action, they do a thing that offends someone, and it just kind of creates tension, and something happens there, and no one really wants to deal with it. No one really fesses up to it. And it gets swept under the rug, and it just slowly becomes part of the culture of the group. And just a little bit further, someone comes in and they're in a tough season, and because they're in a tough season, they don't really feel like talking, they don't really feel like engaging, and slowly over time they just start to disengage, and that sets the precedent of the group that when you're in a hard time, you disengage instead of run to the group for support and for help through whatever's going on. It's just another one little vote in the direction of the group not being what it should be. And see, this problem isn't new within the church. In fact, it started a long time ago, and Paul talks about it a little bit in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 20. He words it this way: "For I'm afraid that when I come, I won't like what I find, and you won't like my response." I love that sentence. It's just fun. He continues, "I'm afraid that I will find quarreling and jealousy and anger and selfishness and slander and selfishness and gossip and arrogance and disorderly conduct." And just one thing by one thing, action for action, what started out as transparent and clear and pure and good doesn't look anything like it once did. And all of a sudden, when you come to group, your expectation for what you're going to experience becomes completely different. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about two specific things, two specific actions, two specific things that have a tendency to happen in our group that change our group from healthy and clear and transparent and thriving and turn it into something that looks more like this. So that's just to set it up a little bit. That's also why we have our friends with us here today, and I'm excited to introduce you to them as well. We have Kevin on with us and Ashleigh on with us. Just in the way of introductions, Kevin is the associate campus pastor here at the Mannheim campus, and he's been at LCBC for several years now, doing a ton of stuff with groups as well. And Kevin, if I remember right, you're a pretty big soccer fan as well. Who is your favorite soccer team, Kevin?
Oh goodness. I have to be keep my allegiances pure. It's the U.S. men's and women's national teams.
Okay.
I don't their club necessarily near as much. And then a shout out to my Hempfield High School guys too. They're one of my favorite teams as well.
Right on. So Kevin coaches soccer as well. So the 5 people in America that watch soccer at all different levels, Kevin is standing with you, and that's a lot of fun. So Ashleigh runs our student ministry over at the Ephrata campus, and she does a killer job. Ashleigh is also, and I don't know if you would describe it this way, Ashleigh, but like a mug connoisseur of sorts. Your mug game is awesome. Can you tell us how many mugs you have?
Thank you for that compliment. I guess I would say a connoisseur is a good term. I don't know how many I have. I started out this year determined that I would do a different mug for every day of the year. And since this was leap year, that meant that I needed 366.
It's a tough year to do that too.
It is. It was a very tough year, but it kept things entertaining in COVID.
Yep.
So in theory, I have at least 366 so far. I've done the job, so this mug won't be seen again until 2021.
I just have to ask this too. I have to. Where do you store all those mugs?
They are everywhere.
I respect that. That's awesome.
I've most of my furniture is like hidden storage just to hide the mugs. But yeah. So in theory, I've got that many, but I've acquired a few more since. So maybe in the 400s.
Yeah. So one more fun question before we get to really the meat of our conversation. Again, I was saying earlier that my jolliness went from 2 to 8. I am curious, with that in mind, because it is Christmas music season, what your favorite Christmas album is, or your favorite artist to listen to around Christmas time. That's just an up for grabs one. What do we got?
Oh boy. See, I don't have a favorite artist in general.
Okay.
Or album. So I go based off of vibes, you know?
Yep. I'm with you. Kev, how about you, man?
Yeah, same. But I do have an answer. I'm sorry. I'm trying to come back from the mug question. My mind's just trying to calculate mathematically how much space that would take. So I got to get off that. Okay. Oldie but a goodie, Charlie Brown Christmas, that album by, I think it's a trio. It's a bunch of musicians.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. It just takes me back to nostalgia. And I like singer-songwriter stuff like Josh Garrels.
Mm-hmm.
He has an album called A Light Came Down. That's my vibe at Christmas. I want to be just as jolly as the man rocking in the corner.
These are real music recommendations. You should be writing these down right now. But let's get to it. Really, what we're here for. I want to talk about 2 specific killers of community within our context in the church here, within small groups. In my opinion, I would say that these are the 2 biggest influencers in an unhealthy way when it comes to our communities within HSM. The first one is pride. And the way I want to describe that is how it oftentimes has a tendency to express itself within our group. So you may have seen a couple of these things happen in a group that you've been in, or frankly, maybe you've done a couple of these things, because I have too. One would be someone kind of comes in with the wrong posture, the wrong attitude, the wrong vibe. It's kind of an I'm better than you kind of a feel, and it expresses itself as just kind of staying quiet, kind of looking around judgingly, just doesn't feel good. Another way of kind of the same attitude of that, I just kind of feel better than you, is completely dominating the conversation, right? They don't really give anyone else an opportunity to speak into things at all. And another way would be constantly making conversation all about yourself, right? Personal story after personal story after personal story. And certainly We all want to know what's going on in each other's lives, but they never really give other people room to share the same way. Or maybe they're constantly distracting from the group. We said earlier that a healthy group has clarity. It's clear on where it's going and how it's going to get there, and they just consistently disregard that and distract. Another one would be like one-upping stories. I don't know if you've seen this before, but someone will give like this huge, like transparent story of like this pain that they feel, and someone immediately follows it with like, yeah, I felt that, but I felt it way worse, and here's why. And it's just like, oh, that sucks. Why would you do that? Or the last one, and this isn't an all-inclusive list, would be cliques. So you think you're jumping into a group and you think it's one group, but in reality, the moment that you sit down in it, it's obvious it's two groups. There's a them and there's a them, and they don't really talk to each other a whole lot. It could be the athletic kids and the not athletic kids, the smart kids and the not smart kids, the in kids and the out kids, doesn't matter. But it's fractured. And the expression that I want to zero in on particularly right now is that time that someone's perpetually stealing the conversation or hijacking the group. So again, that could be personal stories. It could be something that's completely unrelated and they're just completely disregarding what's going on. My question for you guys is, how do you confront someone that's perpetually stealing that conversation or hijacking the group? What's a good way to think about that and ultimately a good way to act in it? What do you guys think?
Yeah, wait a minute, what a good question, because this happens all the time. I'm like the perpetual over-talker in my group. Not surprising, anybody knows me. It's like I just had a lot to say. And so I'm going to take kind of a little different angle. Maybe Ashleigh has a different thought about that. How do you actually address it? But for me, like when somebody's over-talking or redirecting towards themselves or doing something, there's a reason. They're like, that person is showing that maybe people don't listen to them at home. And that's a sucky life. And so this is the one safe place they can talk. And so to assume that they are being prideful just because we're setting that up isn't necessarily assuming the best of them. And so first, like maybe just no one listens to them and they got to have a place to talk. Maybe they're just like, they don't like themselves, so they're trying to be liked. And there's just some real like internal battle stuff there. And then, or they're just like, they need to feel seen and heard. Like somebody needs to tell them, hey, we like you here. Like we like you being here. So first is like empathy, like deal with it with empathy and understanding, like, I wonder why this person's talking so much. But then you can't just wonder, you actually have to like have a conversation. Those happen best privately. Like you could just pull your friend over and be like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And just ask them. Can I say that? Like just ask them, because like somebody just needs to be seen and heard. They're talking. If it's like purposely selfish, like then you also call them on the carpet, like, hey man, that's not what we're about here. And you help guide that back to what it is. And so you set some good ground rules on how to deal with that. But
Kevin, and I just love the first thing that you said. I want to underline that, and just like assuming motives with things when it comes to stuff that's happening in a group and it like rubs you the wrong way, or you don't totally understand why they're doing it that way. Like there's always a reason for it, and it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's some kind of need that needs to be fulfilled, or something needs to happen there. Ashleigh, what do you think?
Yeah, I would actually really agree with Kevin. So humility and pride are polar opposites of each other, which we know. But humility is seeing yourself truthfully, the way God sees you, the way you were designed, the way you were made, and representing that well. And being able to acknowledge that in yourself. So if I'm a good artist, I can say I'm a good artist without being prideful. So a lot of times we think, though, that pride means I think highly of myself. But pride actually can also mean thinking lower or less than, or not allowing your needs to be met. Mm-hmm. And so we all have these basic needs. Essentially, we all need food, we all need air, but we also have emotional needs. I need to be seen, I need to be known, and I need to be heard. And when one of those isn't met, we can go a good chunk of time without symptoms. We can struggle through it, we can be good. But there's a certain moment where you hit starvation. And so those needs then end up representing as neediness. And those are the things that everyone tries to suppress, and they try to ignore, and they try to cast out of the group. And in reality, the best way to meet that neediness is to meet the need. And so just like Kevin was saying, is pull them aside. What's going on? Tell me, like, can I meet this need for you? And so in a way, you don't need to do that in the group. Like Kevin said, you can do that outside the group. You can also be just very intentional in the group. So you can say, hey, I know that Sarah has a really good thought on this topic, or like you've been there. Tell us more. that says, I see you, I know you, I hear you. So you can intentionally call people out, especially when you know they're going to have a great thought.
Yeah.
But I think in order to meet the pride, you have to say, here's a safe way to meet your needs. And then here's boundaries so the unhealthy needs or unhealthy symptoms don't get in the way of what you truly need.
Yeah, and I love that so much because it totally changes your posture. Like initially it's, hey, there's something unhealthy that's happening in the group and it feels like everybody knows it. What do we do with that exactly? And instead of like, hey, we're about to throw down, you're wrong, I'm right, it's, hey, how can I help? What's going on? And that completely changes the course of the conversation. That's so helpful. Want to move on to what oftentimes is a different expression of pride, and it's that clickiness, that us and them. We're in the same group, but we don't really hang out a lot together or really even talk together a whole lot. I want to phrase the question in such a way that it kills it before it even starts, right? So there's one thing if our group already has clickiness in it and there's steps that we can take there, but what I'm curious is, how do we prevent cliques from forming in our group in the first place? How do we stop that train from ever leaving the station, so to speak? What do you guys think about that? The nods. It's all good. Let's do it.
Like, it's just one of those questions, man. I don't want to be in a group that has a clique in it, but like, I just recognize, I played sports my whole life. Like I've been on teams of people and like playing soccer, you mentioned soccer, like there's 26 guys on the team. I am going to be better friends with some of them. It's just a reality. And so there are subgroups within groups that are healthy. They're not all bad.
Yeah.
And so to expect that like all 12 people in my group are going to have the same level of friendship and access to each other is just not reality. And so if that's your expectation, you got to get it in the right spot. That doesn't mean it's a clique.
Right.
So a clique for me becomes when I'm actively trying to exclude people and I'm actively trying to draw lines between people so that like their best interest isn't in my mind. So if I'm on a soccer team and like I don't score goals, I'm a goalkeeper, I play defense, but I'm like actively trying to hurt the offense, like who's that hurting? Like it's killing me and my team. We have the same jerseys on. And so you go to your group, it's like, I'm whining that my group isn't close or I don't have a connection, but I'm actively trying to create a separation between me and them. Like that's on me to create and not pull from. And so like, I think a lot of just in general, a clique, you stop a clique by like, what do you want for everybody in that group and like creating what you want. And so the way I wrote down, like our job in scripture and Ephesians 4 is like that we build up each other, not destroy each other. And so we're always makers and not takers. If you're a maker, not taker, you want cliques. Period.
Yeah.
And I love that too, because every subgroup within a group isn't necessarily a clique. It doesn't need to be a damaging thing. And even as you say that, I think about Jesus, who had his 12 disciples, and then he had his inner three, Peter, James, and John. So I don't think that they would have looked at that as a clique. It was different than that. So Ashleigh, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, there's just people that you naturally click to instantly, and there's people that you naturally don't like. And but for us as Christians, we're not called to step into the dislike. We're actually called to step into the love despite the dislike. And so for me, one of the things, if you hang around me around Ephrata, you know that consistently I will be in a group of 7 people, all from drastically different environments. And I love that because it's allowing me to say, how can I bring you into a conversation that's happening in a way that now we get your insight? So like insider language or insider jokes or conversations you've had on the soccer field can suddenly become a community conversation. If somebody in the group is intentional enough to say, hey, I'm going to step out. I know what this conversation's about. So I'm going to step outside of it, let the conversation continue, and just simply include somebody in. Let them know backstory. Or I just pause the entire conversation and be like, there's like half the group doesn't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to fill us all in. So now we can all contribute. If one person, just simply one, says, I'm going to be intentional to find the things that exclude people and fight them in that moment. A lot of times people just don't realize, hey, this was in my brain. I didn't realize it wasn't common knowledge, right? And so if one person's intentional in fighting that, you are as a whole group fighting the clique.
Yeah, I love that. Just constantly being intentional of inviting other people in. That's good. So we talked about the first thing that really has a tendency to affect our groups in the negative, and that's pride. The next one that I want to go to is gossip. And gossip can express itself in a lot of different ways. I would put two bigger umbrellas, though again, there are others. Maybe a time when you were confiding in someone and you trusted them with information, and then they may have betrayed your trust in some way and told someone that you were hoping they wouldn't. Or another one would be just if someone's talking about you behind your back, and there's the murmurings and the whisperings, and then that just kind of has a tendency to break down trust, even if it wasn't what you thought it was in the first place. They'll just have a tendency to erode the culture of a group over time. So similar to what we were saying before, we could directly go to, hey, like there's gossip in my group, what do I do about that? But I want to take steps prior to that and ask, hey, within your guys' experience, within the communities that you've been a part of, both inside the church and outside of the church, what would you say starts gossip in the first place or triggers gossip in the first place? And then how do we think about that? Is there anything that we can do about that?
Well, I think gossip ends up happening when you're on high emotion. So when you're already strung thin and you're trying to figure out how do you express your emotions in a good way, but also lots going on in your life. And then I also think you accidentally step into gossip when conversation gets out of hand. And so constantly being aware, how do I love others? Because in the Bible, or Jesus says several times, to love God, that's the greatest commandment, to love God and love others as yourself. And against these, there is no law. Meaning, if I can love God, love others and myself in the purest form, I've got the situation right. But a lot of times our emotions are so high, and conversation just in spur of the moment led to one thing to another, and suddenly my words are out of control. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not able to love others, and because I can't love somebody else, in turn, I'm not loving God well. Right. Because I'm not loving God well and I'm not loving others well, I'm not at my best, so I'm not loving me.
Yep.
And so I think you have to start with yourself and say like, hey, is this going to love others well?
And so
my emotions are high, so maybe this is a time for me to take a step back.
And just having some self-awareness there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Kev, how about you, man?
Yeah, I'm learning from Ashleigh. Like I'm trying to pick up some things because this is
a
hard one. Yeah. Like, because I think it's different for a lot of people. I really appreciate that answer about high emotion. It's making me think like sometimes it's not just like high negative emotion. Sometimes I'm just hyper. And like I get just caught off guard following, and I don't have my guards up about like, hey, that's not appropriate, or this is appropriate. And so even high emotions of like positive, fun emotions just get me, running my mouth too much. Yeah, I think if there was like a single trigger for everybody, isn't it division? Like we just desire to like be fractured for some reason. And that can come out of like some of the most insecure people in the groups I'm in. They're the ones that gossip a lot, and they're trying to find ways to build themselves up by tearing each other's down. And like that's a trigger for gossip for them. And so if there's a universal, maybe it's just like, the violence that is division, which is amazing because Jesus, like one of the things he was obsessed with in all scripture is just unity, like unity across people who are not like themselves. I love Ashleigh's example of like people you're with, being with a lot of people who are not like each other is such a like picture of heaven.
It's healthy. Yeah.
Different. Yeah. And yet so in love with the same God. And so we have to be able to on earth and like hold those types of communities in like great regard. Like Jesus even says in Matthew 5, he's so obsessed with unity. He's like, even if you're worshiping me at my altar and like giving a sacrifice, but you remember you have a problem with Caleb, like go talk to Caleb before you come talk to me. And like, you think first and second commandments, isn't God more important than people? And he's like, whoa, hold on. You can't love me unless you do love him first to make it right before you come back to me.
That's so good.
Like that's a God of like, no gossip allowed, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Ash. I think we just fall into it a lot more than we actually intentionally go out to hurt people.
Yeah, and God cares drastically about how his people treat his people. It's over and over and over again. I love that. So talking about what triggers gossip, but now I want to switch it over a little bit to like, how can we make sure that we aren't the ones that are gossiping? How do we get ahead of that? And the way that I want to phrase the question is what's the difference between venting and gossip? So there are times that a situation might hit you the wrong way, or, you know, we all get emotionally jarred at times. How do we process through that in a way that's healthy and not damaging to the community that we're a part? Again, to put it this way, what's the difference between venting and between gossip? What do you guys think about that?
What is venting to you? Why do people vent?
Vent? Processing through things, I think. But again, like we get back to like motives, right? So I would say that at times people have like malicious intent with gossip, and they might be trying to bring people down in order to build themselves up. You had mentioned that earlier, but thinking through like a time for me where a situation might happen and I get immediately triggered, right? And I need to think through it. And in my emotion, I know that I'm cloudy and I can't think through it appropriately. I can't think through it rightly. So trying to think through, hey, who can I bring in that's going to help me think about this rightly? Who's going to help me think about this well, so that I'm not immediately just like out slaying people because I'm angry, like that kind of a thing. So that's oftentimes the distinguishment that I make. But yeah, how about y'all?
Yeah, I would say that like venting is allowed, and hear me, I think your own mental stability is key, right? And so venting is a way of saying, hey, let me process my emotions, my feelings, my thoughts, the things that I have a right to, right? These are valid. These may not be based on truth, but they're valid, right? And so I need to know that they're there. I need to understand why they're there. So venting is a good thing. I think that's one of the reasons why counselors or psychologists are so critical, because there's a safe place to let your brain process itself, right? So venting is good, I would say. I think there's a tricky fine line between gossip and venting. Gossip is essentially, there's so many ways to define this. There's so many ways you can fall into it. But I think a lot of them end up falling into the same bracket that if I'm trying to persuade somebody else, so if let's say I have an issue with Kevin and I could then go to Caleb and say, hey, this is what Kevin's doing. And I try to persuade Caleb into feeling or thinking or believing something about Kevin that's disrespectful, whether true or not. Disrespectful or negative, or a story that wasn't mine to share because it was Kevin's. If that all falls into my venting, you've now slipped into gossip. Right. And so what is yours to share and what is theirs that they need to be contributing for?
Right. And even there, yeah. And even there's a time where it's like, hey, I know that I'm in an unhealthy mental place. I need you to help me think through this more clearly versus, hey, I want you to think about that person the way that I think about that person in my anger. Whether I'm trying to get you to clarify something for me or whether I'm trying to influence you, I think is a helpful distinguishment too. Yeah.
So I think what I hear you guys saying is like venting helps me make things better. And it's going to help me then go deal with it. And gossip is like going to hurt them to make me feel better. Yeah. And so there's a little bit of a target on like, why am I even talking about this to somebody else? And man, what a like powerful thing if you're just trying to make the situation better. So again, we're like striving for unity, or like Ashleigh was saying, like I'm striving to make a community better by like getting it out of me. And I'm that dude. I struggle so bad with a piece of paper alone, quietly making sense of my thoughts. It doesn't like it is torture to get them out.
I love that.
Oh my gosh. It's like, why'd you make me this way, God? Like, but I'm like really good with a friend. Like, hey, can I just talk this out? You listen, don't say anything. And like, as I'm talking, it all just kind of orients itself. And so I have a couple safe people, but the best ones are ones that look at me like, all right, cool. What are you gonna do about it now? Because they realize it's my responsibility. I can't shift that to them. And so what Ashleigh was talking about too is really good. We're like triangulating relationships. If I talk to Caleb about my problem with Ashleigh, like the distance between me and Caleb, that line's never going to get fixed. And the one between Caleb and Ashleigh may not get fixed, even when I fix the one between me and Ashleigh.
Yep.
So that the extra like layers of problems, like that's where like other gossip then goes to gossip, another gossip goes to, so like if you can be a friend when somebody's venting with you or like talking to you about it and just ask them a question, like, cool, what are you going to do about it? You need my help? Like, let's go make it better. You all become a part of forming community that I think is so much more Christ honoring than destroying community.
Yeah, that's so helpful. As we close down today, I want to thank you, Kevin, and you, Ashleigh, for joining us today. Both so helpful just in your comments and helping us think about things. So thank you so much. And as we close, here's what I want you to think about. Do you want your community, do you want your group to be transparent and clear and pure, or do you want it to look like this? Because in order to avoid this, we need to kill the things that can kill our community. We need to kill the things that can kill our community, whether it's pride, whether it's gossip, and all the ways that expresses itself. God cares so much about how his people treat his people, and how that happens immediately communicates things to the world. But my question for you as we close is, what is your group communicating to the world by how you treat each other? Okay? So just thinking about it a little bit, let's get actionable. Let's continue to strive to be the healthiest, most God-honoring groups that we can be. Excited to see you guys next week.